This is a car, but you probably already knew that. Cars have become an integral part of our lives, and they have traveled a long way to become what they are today. But how did that happen exactly? We've arrived in the 18th century. No smartphones, no Wi-Fi, people in powdered wigs. Truly the Dark Ages. Look, over there. A guy is tinkering with a steam-powered wagon. It's basically a giant tea kettle on wheels, hissing and chugging like it had one too many espressos. In 1769, French inventor Nicolas Joseph Cugnot built a clunky three-wheeled contraption that moved on its own without a horse. Witchcraft. This thing could go 2 miles per hour. Yup, a fearless jogging grandma could overtake it. It was so slow and heavy that during a test drive, it promptly crashed into a wall, becoming the world's first fender bender. Congrats! We managed to invent the car and the car accident in one go. People at the time were flabbergasted. You mean it moves without a horse? Sacre bleu! Society wasn't quite ready for these horseless carriages. Fast forward to the 19th century. Inventors all over the world are trying wild ideas to build better horseless rides. It was basically like the Wild West, but with steam and electric carriages. Surprise! Electric cars aren't a new thing. In fact, in the 1800s, electric carriages were very popular because they didn't spew smelly smoke or require you to crank a handle like you're winding up a jack-in-the-box. But battery life was the ultimate party pooper. I guess some things never change. But then in 1886, a German engineer named Carl Benz said, "Hold mein Bier, I've got this." And he built the Benz patent Motorwagen, the first gasoline-powered car, which is often credited as the first true automobile. It had 3 wheels, a tiny one-cylinder engine, and a top speed of about 10 miles per hour, on a good day. But Carl wasn't just a madman, he was a madman who married a mad woman, because his wife, Bertha Benz, decided to take her husband's invention on a road trip to prove it was practical. Which it wasn't, because not only did she have to refuel at a pharmacy, since, gas stations weren't a thing yet, she also had to invent brake pads on the fly by nailing leather to the wooden brake pads, because Carl hadn't designed the car for road trips since Bertha technically stole it without telling her husband. Fast forward a couple of years, cars are now a thing and they're starting to catch on. But they're still mostly playthings for rich inventors and curious tinkerers. Enter the 20th century and say hello to a man named Henry Ford, who basically says, let's get everyone in on this fun. In 1908, Ford introduces the Model T, the car that would put the world on wheels. It was kind of like the iPhone of cars, not because it had a touchscreen, it barely had a windshield, but because it was a game changer that everyone suddenly wanted. The Model T was simple, sturdy, and came in any color you wanted, as long as it was black. Fashion choices were limited. You weren't picking out midnight cherry or electric blue back then. Ford also pioneered the assembly line in 1913, which was basically a conveyor belt that spat out cars faster than a popcorn machine. Instead of one guy painstakingly building one car at a time, each worker did a little task as the car in progress rolled by, like a chaotic sushi train of car parts. The result? Cars became affordable for the average person. By the 1920s, millions of Model Ts were buzzing around, and horses everywhere were quietly put into early retirement. Hey John, I think we lost our jobs.
We were getting paid in food, man. It wasn't a good job to begin with.
With cars now multiplying like rabbits on the road, a few other things had to happen. We paved roads, goodbye mud, hello asphalt. Put up traffic lights, and after a few wild years of everyone playing vehicular chicken at intersections, and invented gas stations so people could actually fuel these things without disturbing the local pharmacist. Cars also started evolving fast. They grew roofs, windows, and features like heaters to prevent your man-thingies from going into your food pouch. Somebody even said, hey, maybe music? And invented the car radio in 1930. Suddenly, road trips became karaoke time. Well, crackly Great Depression-era jazz time to be exact. Designs got sleeker and more closed in, moving away from the horse and carriage with an engine look to the actual automobile look. And as cars spread, society changed. People could live farther from work, take Sunday drives for fun, and teenagers discovered a wonderful new thing called privacy in the back seat.
Wow.
Then the 1940s hit, and the world had some, other priorities. Hello, World War II. Car production stopped and factories turned to making tanks, jeeps, and planes. Basically, cars went to war. But on the bright side, by the war's end, we'd invented things like better engines and radar, tech that would sneak its way into post-war cars. 1950s, baby. The war is over, rock and roll is on the radio, and car culture is exploding. Suddenly, everyone and their grandma wants a car. And not just any car, a big, shiny car with lots of chrome and ridiculously flamboyant tail fins. Seriously, 1950s cars looked like they were competing in drag shows. Blame it on the space race or an Elvis Presley obsession, but designers thought every car should look like a rocket ship ready to blast off to Mars. It was the golden age of American car design. Huge grills, two-tone paint jobs, hood ornaments that could take an eye out, ashtrays for every passenger because smoking was cool, and interiors so comfy they were basically living rooms on wheels. Also, let's not forget the birth of drive-in diners and theaters. The car had become more than just a transportation machine. It was a status symbol, a fashion statement, and a part of the family. But that changed in the 1960s. Things got fast and furious. The 60s became the era of the muscle car, loud V8s, and designs that make you want to drag race at every stoplight, with the Ford Mustang roaring onto the scene in 1964, basically saying, "I'm hot, I'm flexible, and I've got low standards." Chevy, Dodge, and others soon followed suit with cars like the Camaro, Charger, and GTO. These cars had so much power they made earlier cars look like wind-up toys. It was an arms race of horsepower. If your car didn't sound like a chain-smoking grizzly bear clearing its throat, were you even cool, bruh? Gasoline was cheap and plentiful, so nobody cared that these things got about 5 miles per gallon. Downhill, with a tailwind. It was all about cruising, drag racing, and impressing whoever tickled your fancy. The 60s is also when pop culture put cars on the screen. James Bond had his gadget-filled Aston Martin with an ejector seat for pesky bad guys, Batman had the Batmobile, basically a street-legal rocket, and in 1968, Steve McQueen's movie Bullet featured a car chase so epic it basically said, "Cars are the action heroes now." But hold on, not everything was rosy on the roads. By the late 60s, people started noticing that maybe, just maybe, cars were dangerous and the air was getting gross. Shocker, right? Governments and safety advocates went, guys, how about we try not dying so much in these things? Enter seatbelts. Before this, seatbelts were about as common as unicorns. Car makers were like, safety? Just don't crash, bro. In 1965, a guy named Rolf Nader published Unsafe at Any Speed, calling out car manufacturers for making vehicles that were basically death traps on wheels. This led to a whole lot of finger pointing and eventually actual safety standards. By the end of the 60s and early 70s, new cars had to have seatbelts, and later things like headrests to prevent your neck from bending the wrong way, and shatter-resistant windshields. Meanwhile, cities were choking on smog from all those vroom vroom machines. In 1970, the US created the EPA and said, "Clean up your act, cars." So car companies started figuring out how to reduce emissions, so they added the catalytic converter in 1975, a magic metal canister in your exhaust that turns bad fumes into slightly less bad fumes. They also began phasing out leaded gasoline, because apparently, filling the air with brain-damaging lead was a bad idea. Who knew? Then the 1970s pulled a plot twist that nobody expected. The oil crisis. In 1973, some global political drama caused oil shortages, and suddenly, long lines formed at gas stations. It was like Black Friday, but for gasoline. People could only buy gas on certain days, prices shot up, and those big gas-guzzling boats from the 60s felt about as practical as a chocolate teapot. This era humbled the muscle car. Horsepower plummeted. A 1975 quote-unquote muscle car might get beat off the line by a well-fed horse. It was that bad. And automakers scrambled to make smaller, more efficient cars. Enter the rise of the compact car. Japanese automakers like Toyota and Honda, who had been quietly selling reliable little cars, suddenly became the cool kids on the block. The Honda Civic, Toyota Corolla, and Datsun models proved that cars could be cheap to run and not fall apart. And they came with a wild feature. They actually started in the morning. Every single time. Which was a big deal because American cars of the late 70s sometimes had commitment issues. By the end of the 70s, cars weren't as ridiculous looking or as powerful as the decade before, but they were cleaner, safer, and more practical. You win some, you lose some. At least you could still get snazzy colors, and if you were fancy, an 8-track tape player to blast your Bee Gees tunes. For the young folks watching, an 8-track was basically like a Spotify membership. Now we go into the 1980s, and that's when things kind of got fun again. I mean, sure, cars from this era might not be remembered for being the sexiest. Most of them were so square they looked like they needed to be unboxed. But this decade brought tech into the mix. The auto industry discovered the microchip and said, let's put the silicon wizardry everywhere. engines suddenly got electronic fuel injection and computers to manage things, meaning cars ran smoother and wasted less gas. Sayonara, carburetors, you had a good run. And also, dashboard designs went futuristic for the time. Digital speedometers, screens, and talking cars that would politely inform you,
"A door is ajar."
It was like having a primitive Siri in your car, minus the internet and with a very annoying robotic voice.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And then, we started seeing a feature everybody loves to this day, pop-up headlights. They were the automotive equivalent of a mullet haircut. Business during the day, cute party at night. Now the 80s could be summed up with two cars, the time-traveling DeLorean DMC-12 from Back to the Future and KITT from Knight Rider, the super AI car that made David Hasselhoff look even cooler, if that's possible. Oh, I forgot about the kids watching. David Hasselhoff was basically a mix between The Rock and Zac Efron. Anyways, that's not all we got during this glorious decade. We also got CD players, mini round USB sticks for your car, and the minivan, the unsung hero for large families. It was shaped like a loaf of bread, but it carried all the kids and groceries, and it became wildly popular. Not exactly a pop culture heartthrob, nobody was writing rock songs about minivans, but hey, they got the job done. On to the 1990s, the era of grunge, dial-up internet, and the Toyota Camry taking over suburbia. In the 90s, cars started to get safer and smarter in a big way. Manufacturers finally realized that drivers appreciate not dying, so airbags became standard, not just for the driver, but for passengers too. Some cars even sprouted side airbags, protecting you from T-bone collisions like an invisible pillow fort, and anti-lock brakes. Design-wise, cars got curvy and the boxy look was rolled out with the Cold War. In fact, cars got so round, you could almost hear the wind saying, "Thank you." The 90s also said, "Let's go big." Cue the rise of the SUV. Sure, SUVs existed before, but the Ford Explorer, launched in 1990, made SUVs the vehicle of choice for families and anyone who wanted to feel like an off-road adventurer on the way to the mall. It was a trade. The minivan had practicality, but the SUV had attitude. And four-wheel drive for those 2 days a year it snowed. By the end of the 90s, we also got the first modern hybrid car, the Toyota Prius in 1997. It looked kind of odd and had the acceleration of an exhausted turtle, but it was so efficient that it felt like it ran on the thought of fuel, not the fuel itself, and it kickstarted the whole hybrid movement. Enter the 2000s, the new millennium, where we all thought we'd have flying cars by then. Spoiler alert, we didn't. But we did get cars that talked to satellites. Yes, GPS navigation became a common thing. Suddenly, the car could smugly tell you, in 500 feet, turn left. And if you missed the turn, it was recalculating, with a hint of judgment. But not just that, we got Bluetooth and said goodbye to CDs thanks to iPods. The design of cars in the 2000s continued the trend of aerodynamic and sleek. Even the once rugged Jeep got rounder headlights as if to say, I can be tough and cute. Car makers also started to discover that quality matters. By now, most cars, whether from Japan, Europe, or the US, wouldn't just implode at 100,000 miles. A 2000s car, if maintained, could last longer than most boy bands from the 90s. Speaking of boy bands, the 2000s also gave us Pimp My Ride, the TV show where they'd take a beat-up car and add like 12 subwoofers, a cotton candy machine, and a PlayStation in the trunk. It was ridiculous and fabulous, and it reflected a general trend. People wanted their cars to be unique. They installed neon underglow lights, huge spoilers, fancy spinning rims, and a lot of screens. If the 2000s had a motto, it was more is more. And of course, we can't forget the Fast and the Furious, which single-handedly made every teenager think that adding a giant exhaust and a flame decal would make their 15-year-old Civic a supercar. It mostly just made it louder and still a Civic. But the franchise did ignite a passion for cars and tuning worldwide. Also, it was around that time when hybrids became mainstream cool. The Prius went from being an obscure eco-warrior to the ride of choice for Hollywood celebs who wanted to signal, I care about the earth and my image. Even if you weren't into hybrids, you couldn't ignore that fuel efficiency was a big deal now, especially after gas prices spiked again in the mid-2000s. This set the stage for the real game changer coming up. Drum roll, please. Electric cars, take two. Now we arrive in the 2010s and beyond. Basically the present day, where cars have become smartphones on wheels. The transformation is pretty insane when you think about it. For one, electric cars are back with a vengeance. They're bona fide performance monsters and luxury rides. Tesla led the charge, pun absolutely intended, and soon everyone from BMW to Ford, Audi, Chevy, and Mercedes followed suit. Aside from going electric, cars also got a brain upgrade. We're talking self-driving technology. Yeah, the car is learning to drive itself. Kind of like teaching a toddler to ride a bike. There have been a few scrapes and mishaps along the way, but progress is being made. Companies like Google, Tesla, and Uber poured billions into developing AI chauffeurs. By the mid-2010s, we saw test cars with spinning LiDAR sensors on their roofs, cruising around California without a human touching the wheel. It looked a bit like a science fiction movie. Now, we're not going to go deeper into this because, well, we're currently living it. But it's impressive how far cars have come and how fast they've evolved, to the point where they have become a part of who we are.